So we need to talk about what Putin just did in Poland. Finally, this despotic warmonger has crossed a line that NATO and those opposed to tyranny, oppression, and neo-imperialism cannot afford to ignore. In the early hours of September 10th, 20 plus Russian drones tearing into Polish airspace, wreaking havoc and directly damaging residencies. Not by mistake, not by accident, but by design. This indeed was a probe, a deliberate calculated test to see how far they can get away with. The first time that NATO aircraft directly engage Russian military hardware. But NATO's response, to many a chaotic, somewhat reserved attempt to engage, scrambling billion-dollar jets to shoot down cheap, unmanned aerial projectiles, with many slipping through, and others simply a feckless effort at diplomacy and to avoid using the wrong language in response. And that is precisely the danger. That if NATO continues to frame these moments as simply incidents to de-escalate, as merely offers to call on Moscow to cease and desist, all it will do is ensure that Putin treats them as green lights to push further. Because this is no longer a question of if Moscow will test this again, it's a question of when. And every time NATO fails to respond, specifically with force, Putin learns the same lesson. He can get away with it. So we are reaching a breaking point. These drone incursions aren't just provocations. They are rehearsals, dress rehearsals for something far bigger. And if we don't treat them that way, the consequences for Poland, for the Baltics, for the entirety of Europe could be catastrophic. So in this video, I'm going to break down what has happened just now, why it really does matter even more than you think, and where this could be heading dependent upon how NATO and Europe seek to respond.
This is the Global Gambit.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this rather set of raw reactions from me. I want to just start specifically to understand why what we saw in the past 24 hours in Poland matter. To understand why it matters, we need to understand the man behind it. Vladimir Putin has spent his entire life obsessed with rewriting history and restoring what he sees as a lost empire. Beginning his career as a KGB officer in the Soviet Union, trained to manipulate, to deceive, to crush dissent. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, he described it as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. That single line revealing everything. He has never accepted the independence of the nations freed from Soviet rule, nor the demise of what he sees as the almighty Russian Federation. Since coming to power then, every major move he has done has been about trying to turn back the clock. From 2008, sending troops into Georgia, carving out Abkhazia and South Ossetia, to 2014 in the annexation of Crimea under the banner of, quote, restoring Russian lands, and of course to February 22, launching his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, justifying it with distorted tales of, quote, historical unity. But each step follows the same pattern: lie, manipulate, manufacture history, and send Russians, often poorly equipped conscripts, to die for a fantasy of imperial revival. And that is the greatest irony as of someone who comes from this country in question, in that chasing this warped destiny of restoring Russia's greatness, Putin is destroying the very country he claims to be saving, bleeding its people, hollowing out its economy, and condemning Russia to isolation in the name of an empire that no longer exists and should never exist. This is not about security concerns. It is about conquest. Putin has lied to his people, to his soldiers, to the world, pushing a narrative of restoring greatness, when in reality he is condemning Russia to endless decline. And if history shows us anything, it is this: he only respects force, from Chechnya to Georgia to Ukraine. Every time he sees weakness, he pushes further, and every time the West hesitates, he escalates. Now, over the past few weeks, Putin has been riding high. He has been legitimized on the world stage from Washington to Beijing. He's continued to intensify strikes across Ukraine, clawing back ground, so he claims, although it's only incrementally on the battlefield, but still enough that he can now sell to the Russian people and to onlookers, to the states that do support him, that the tide is turning and that Russia has the momentum. And against this backdrop, the drone incursions into Poland are designed to test one thing: NATO's resolve. On that September morning, the 20 drones enter Polish airspace. but only 4 shot down, the ones that pose a direct threat. The rest? Well, they're decoys, actually, known as Gabira drones, Iranian-designed Shaheeds, but without any warheads. Their purpose wasn't destruction, but deception, to, well, try to overwhelm radars and deplete air defences before a second wave of armed drones could head for Ukraine's western city of Lviv. And here's what makes this particularly alarming. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk making it clear one drone might be an accident, but 19, well, of course that isn't. And that's just the start. How many waves can we see? We can draw parallels and examples from the past year and a half in how the Iranians have utilized their own Shaheed drones against Israel. Now, to many, including myself, this is not an attack as it is more a rehearsal, an attempt to see how NATO responds and individual countries respond. A probing test of NATO's early warning systems, response times, coordination. Italian's defense minister Guardia Crosetto has called it a deliberate attack with 2 purposes: to provoke and to test. Even Belarus, Putin's so-called ally, the backyard of the political union, has been caught by surprise, suggesting that Lukashenko himself had no idea the drones were headed into Poland and that Belarusian officials gave alert to Warsaw about the incoming waves. That's how reckless this is. Putin is blindsiding his own puppet to escalate on NATO's border. Now, as I said at the beginning, this is the first time that we've seen NATO forces directly engage Russian drones. Dutch F-35s were scrambled, an Italian surveillance plane joined. Germany boosted the alert level and fed data from its Patriot batteries stationed in Poland. NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte praised the successful reaction and vowed to defend, quote, every inch of Allied territory. But beneath that rhetoric, the truth still is obvious that scrambling billion-dollar aircraft against cheap, not just drones, but decoys is unsustainable. And Europe is still nowhere near ready for the kind of mass drone and missile assaults that Ukraine faces on a nightly basis. Putin's playbook hasn't changed. Probe, escalate, normalize. These drones weren't just crossing into Poland. They're about trying to test the psychological threshold and see how far the alliance will bend before it breaks. Even now, Article 4 has been activated, but nothing more than that. And meanwhile, Donald Trump, he's out having dinner with mates, all very visually across Washington. So the timing of this is no accident. Days after the incursions, Russia and Belarus stage what's known as their Zapad war games, a massive drill that simulates a joint response to a NATO attack. Past versions have rehearsed nuclear strikes on Warsaw. The last one, in 2021, well, it served as a cover for troop buildups that, well, eventually led to the Ukrainian invasion a few months later. So this year, analysts say that Zapad had 3 goals: to test NATO's response, to demonstrate that Russia is still a formidable force despite having battlefield losses and perhaps being stretched across multiple fronts, and thirdly, to maintain a constant state, a perpetual state of anxiety in NATO's eastern members, most obviously Poland, the Baltics, Finland. Moreover, though, the drones weren't only about provocation. Some have accused Finland of preparing for war with Russia. We all know who that would be: Dmitry Medvedev. Nikol Patrushev has declared the Baltic Sea, quote, an undeclared hybrid war. Poland has responded by closing its border with Belarus. And Donald Tusk has put it bluntly that this isn't a state of war, but it is more dangerous than all previous ones. So the point is that this isn't just about drones, it's about psychology. The goal has been to try and divide NATO across multiple fronts, demanding a firm response and then dismissing it as no big deal because there is no united front. Former Lithuanian foreign minister, for example, has warned that this is about creating a, quote, new reality. And as Europe has tolerated Russian sabotage and cyber attacks for so long, Moscow sees, well, the ability to utilize drones as potentially a new normal. And once we accept that, well, then maybe we can do a little bit more. We can incur a little bit more into Baltic airspace, further into Polish airspace. Ironically, though, even Putin's biggest backers in Europe, the ones that try to appease him the most, Viktor Orban and Robert Fico, have been quick to condemn what has happened. So perhaps a small degree of cautious optimism is that this may well propel more unity because Putin pushes it too far. So NATO faces a stark choice here. Treat these incursions as more and more provocations, but nothing more than that, or as the thin edge of a wedge that must be stopped now. Because Putin only respects force, and if he believes he can get away with this, then the next test won't be just drones. It will be something far more dangerous, and something that clearly, right now, NATO and Europe more specifically are just not prepared for. Thanks for watching this video, everyone. Now, if you enjoyed this sort of more raw reaction, then do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you don't know me, my name is Pyotr Kurzin. I am a mixture of West and East, in that I'm half Russian, I'm half British, but I've been brought up predominantly in the West, and I appreciate the sort of Russian cultural heritages that I have. I've worked inside a mixture of leading think tanks, from the International Crisis Group to the United Nations, and I've attempted to build this channel with the incentive to cut through the noise, to bring an insider, so to speak, expertise of a balance between the two sides. And if you value that, including the guests that I try to engage with on a weekly basis, then do give the video a like, subscribe, and share with people that you feel will benefit from it. Until next time, though, see you all then.